Okay, let's talk about fuel cells and fuel cell cars. And I have this little toy fuel cell car. Somewhere down under there's a fuel cell. This balloon here is the fuel tank. And so it's a little toy car made by Horizon Fuel Cells. And, it's really just a toy, but it also demonstrates the whole hydrogen fuel cell system. So this part of the thing is a hydrogen producing gizmo. It takes electricity in through those plugs there, and you pour water into this tank, and the gizmo behind there is a little fuel cell that's used to electrolyze the water and produce hydrogen. Hydrogen goes through this tube, fills up the fuel tank. And to provide the electricity, they provide this little solar panel. Okay, so that's the system. So the first step to doing this is you'll notice that the fuel tank, this little balloon, is already full. It's already expanded. And for the fuel cell to work, it needs to be pure hydrogen. Fuel cells take hydrogen and oxygen, and they produce electricity and water. So that's a lot of the attraction to fuel cells, is that the outputs are really clean. But in any case, this balloon here, this fuel tank that they provided me, is already full. So they provided this little syringe that you attach to the hose line. And then you pull the syringe out, and the balloon collapses. Okay, so that means that all the air is out of the system to some degree of all. Okay, so that prepares the system. So here's a diagram that they provided. It's in the instruction book. What is a fuel cell and how does it work? So it says it's an electrical circuit that's 40 to 60% efficient. Hydrogen and oxygen come in at different sides. So hydrogen, oxygen. There's some heat produced, air and water vapor, and a flow of electricity. So that's the idea. They also provide these pictures here to sort of show why this is important. And so it's showing this really cool vision of solar-powered electricity, wind-powered electricity, fueling a car that is completely clean. So the car itself is clean. It just takes hydrogen, produces water. That part is clean. And so for the system to be clean, the source of the electricity that makes the hydrogen has to also be clean. So the thing about hydrogen as a fuel is that hydrogen doesn't occur by itself in nature, except for in stars. The stars are hydrogen and helium mostly, but hydrogen is the most abundant element, but it's always tied up into something, like the water that I've poured into this tank. It requires this special gizmo that's inside the tank there to electrolyze the water and extract the hydrogen from the water. So hydrogen has to come from somewhere, and what they suggest is wind power electricity, solar power electricity to produce the hydrogen that's the fuel for the car. And if you remember a few years ago, that was the concept being sold to us for clean cars, was a hydrogen-powered car using fuel cells. So now I've connected up the solar panel. So if you see, there's some wires, red and black wires, that go from the solar panel to the fuel cell unit. Now, if you notice, there's bubbles forming, so that's the electrolysis happening. There's also some, I don't know how well it's coming through, but there's some flashing lights down at the bottom, which I assume has something to do with the electrolysis. And then the last thing is that the balloon is filling up. So again, going over the system, we have a solar panel producing electricity going into this thing that electrolyzes water. There's a tank, or there's a hose rather, that's connecting to this balloon that's doubling as a fuel tank. And in a few minutes we'll be able to see it powering the car. So the tank is pretty full now. And something I've noticed, don't know how well you can see it, but the water level in this tank is a little bit down. I had filled it all the way to the top, but it's just a little bit down. So this process consumes water to produce the hydrogen that goes through the car and then becomes water again. So that's one of the little side effects of this process is transduction, I guess would be the right word, of water to hydrogen and then back to water. Well, this is an unfortunate, because I had hoped to show the car moving. Actually, the last time we used this thing, the car did run fine, but for some reason today, when I turn the power switch on, it's not doing anything. Now, in the book, that does say there is a little section talking about if the fuel cell has not been used for a while, that there's a little procedure that they tell you to do to reawaken the fuel cell. So I haven't done that yet. I would need to take this apart and do some special things. But one thing I wanted to go over was kind of a folly about this whole thing. I mean, this whole thing does appear to be really clean. Okay, obviously. The idea is wonderful in many ways. You know, sunlight powering a fuel cell that's producing hydrogen that's going into cars. But like one of the things to think about is there's electricity here. This is producing electricity. And then inside the car, between the fuel cell and the wheels, is electricity again. So you've got electricity here, and you've got electricity here. And in between, you've got hydrogen, and you've got these fuel cell things. So what you're doing here is transferring electricity to wheels using hydrogen as an intermediary. And in that intermediary, there's a couple steps of conversion. This thing is a step of conversion where it's converting electricity into hydrogen. And then over here in the fuel cell, you've got another step of conversion where the hydrogen is being converted into electricity. So you've got two steps of conversion. Each step of conversion has efficiency losses. So if you think about an electric car where instead of this hydrogen fuel tank and the fuel cell, you've got a battery pack and a controller directly feeding, you know, in both cases you've got the same end drivetrain. You've got an electric motor. So a fuel cell car is an electric car that's simply using hydrogen for electricity storage rather than a battery for electricity storage. But it's going to be more efficient to simply ship electricity into the car and store electricity as electricity rather than storing the electricity as hydrogen. The studies say that it uses 3 times the amount of energy to store the hydrogen or store the electricity as hydrogen and convert that electricity back and forth between hydrogen rather than just shipping electricity around. Okay, the drivetrain is a little bit easier to see this way. So this part is the actual fuel cell. I don't know if you can see it, but there's this fuel cell is directly open. The plastic on the bottom of this car is open at the bottom, and so the air comes directly to the fuel cell right here. This again is the fuel tank. And right here is an electric motor with some gearing here going to the wheels. Okay, so you've got fuel cell, or hydrogen fuel tank rather, going to the fuel cell, and then there's some wiring that goes to this electric motor, which goes to the wheel. So that's the drivetrain. And this demonstrates that a fuel cell car is an electric car that uses hydrogen. So another little folly of this system is the hydrogen infrastructure that would be required to adopt fuel cell cars in a widespread way. So there's been this issue going on for several years, or discussion rather, several years about how to get clean cars widely used. And you remember a few years ago there was a lot of people talking about the hydrogen economy, a lot of hype about it, etc. And so this is an example of the hydrogen economy right here. Okay, but how many places do you see hydrogen available to be bought? Okay? It's a very important question. Where are the fuel cell vehicles going to get the hydrogen required to run them? Okay, today we have gasoline available widely because there's ubiquitous gasoline stations, and we have electricity available ubiquitously everywhere that the electricity grid goes. And in the U.S. anyway, and in any Western modern country, that electricity grid is everywhere and it's reliable. Okay? Where is the hydrogen grid? Where is hydrogen? Nowhere. Well, actually, it's not nowhere. There are specialized companies that provide hydrogen, but they're not on street corners, and they're not selling to the general public. These specialized companies that are selling hydrogen, they're selling to specialized industrial users who need hydrogen. Okay? There is no commercial hydrogen infrastructure that would supply fuel cell vehicles. And to build out that infrastructure would require huge amounts of money. Okay? Now, we're in a process right now of adopting electric vehicles, and in terms of the debate about what kind of clean vehicles are going to be popular, it seems that electric vehicles have won out over hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. But even so, there is this issue going on of building out an infrastructure of charging stations for electric vehicles. Now, the thing is that they're having to build charging stations, but they're connecting those charging stations to an existing network of electricity supply, versus what would have to be done for the fuel cell vehicles, which would be some kind of mass distribution of hydrogen to stations where you can fill up your car.